seconds.
Welcome to Clever Title Pending, a proud member of the Rising Tide Broadcast Network. We talk to creatives about creativity and the business behind them. So type in your questions and become part of the conversation. And now, here's your host, Brian K. Morris.
And welcome, everyone. Welcome to Clever Title Pending for Tuesday, September 21st, 2020. And we hope you're having a great day so far. We're glad you're here. And I'm really tickled. We've got a good friend of mine, Stuart Sayger, who is a commercial artist, an incredible illustrator. We're going to talk to him about his work, how he got where he is. And I want you all to take notes and also bring some questions. Now, we've only got Stuart for about an hour or so, but let's take advantage of that time. But speaking of taking advantage, we're glad to take advantage of the generosity of Plasma Fire Graphics, who are sponsoring this episode. Plasma Fire Graphics, when the look of your book matters to you. We're going to be talking a lot about covers tonight, comic book covers, other type of covers. But when you want a cover for your paperback book that's going to make people want to pick it up and take it home with them, then you want to contact Jeffrey Hayes at Plasma Fire Graphics. Check out their Facebook page and also go to plasmafiregraphics.com where you can inquire about his very affordable rates. That's Plasma Fire Graphics, when the look of your book matters to you, because it definitely matters to your readers. And we want to thank the Rising Tide Broadcast Network, 7 days a week of entertainment and information. Our schedule is going to be changing a little starting next month. We're going to welcome the Dastardly Dingoes coming to Tuesday nights starting in October. And I will be starting a brand new show called BK Minutes on October 1st. It's going to be decidedly different. But anyway, please check out these shows. We've got, let's see, tonight's Tuesday. So tomorrow morning, we've got Michaela Jade's Morning Motivationals at 7 a.m., followed by Nevermind the Furthermore, which has me. And then tomorrow, the return of the Truth Mongers with Ted Davies and Glenn B. Fleming. You're definitely going to want to check that out. So check out the Rising Tide Broadcast Network page on Facebook and give it a like. And I like my Patreon supporters. Patreon is a monthly subscription service where you can support your favorite creators directly with a small monthly stipend. And it does add up, and we appreciate it so very much. And one of the perks is you get to see your name on the episodes of my shows. So if you want to see your name here, go to www.patreon.com/Brian K. Morris and find out all the cool things you'll get in return for your support, aside from just my gratitude. But anyway, I don't want to waste anyone's patience here. We have got somebody who I've been a fan of for many years. We met probably about 5 years ago at probably one of the worst shows I've ever been at in Evansville, Indiana. But it was worth it because I made this gentleman's acquaintance, and we keep running into each other. And he is just an absolute delight. I would like to welcome a great illustrator, great guy, Stuart Sayger. That's you, fella. And I'm going to unmute you here so everyone can hear your dulcet tones. Stuart, how are you doing tonight?
Quite well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
So far so good. Aside from starting the show with the wrong card, if that's the worst thing I do tonight, I'm gonna be all right.
Quite all right. We'll make it.
That's all right. We will. So anyway, Stuart you see some of Stuart's work behind him right there. Stuart is a prolific painter and illustrator. He does a number of comic book covers. He's done a lot of commercial work. But I'm going to let Stuart introduce himself and tell you why he is so amazing. Stuart, you get the spotlight now.
Well, I can tell you some of the things I've worked on, and you can tell me how amazing they are or aren't. How's that?
Okay.
I've been drawing comic books for about 20 years. I broke into the industry by self-publishing a comic book called Shiver in the Dark. It was a horror comic book. I had about 3 issues of that come out, and at some point I was approached by DC Comics to work on a couple of their projects. My big real breakthrough was that I got to draw Lego Bionicle. If you know the Lego toy line, this was a book that DC published for them. I drew 2 years worth of that. So depending on your age, I've had many fans tell me they learned to read from my comic books, which is kind of flattering.
Nice.
I did that for a few years. These days, I'm doing a lot of cover work for Dynamite. Let's see, they just came out with a new series of Army of Darkness based on the Bruce Campbell movies. I've been doing all the covers for those. I'm also doing covers for Kiss, the Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley rock and roll band. I've now done 26 covers for them. I think that puts me as the most of anybody who's done covers for them. But I've worked on lots of other things. I worked on the Man of Steel movie. I did a Walking Dead variant cover. This is behind me here is a Joker, Year of the Villain comic book. I did a few of these with DC comic books. I've probably left off several things. I've done Transformers, some G.I. Joe. There was a while where if you walked into Target or any of the other great shopping centers in America, there was a good chance you could find a DC Comics related t-shirt with my character art on it. I know I did several Batmans, Harley Quinn, Joker, all kinds of things. Right now I'm working on a new covers for a horror comic from Dynamite that they just haven't announced yet. So I can't tell you what it is. But in the meantime, the Army of Darkness and Kiss are still coming out.
That's fantastic. That is great. And also, he has a website, stuartsayger.com, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And a Facebook.com. And a Facebook page, right?
Yeah, and I much like you, I've got a live show that I do the second and fourth Thursday of the month. I can't do one this Thursday because I'm actually helping my wife with a fundraiser for Nickel Plate Arts.
Oh, how cool.
So, big annual fundraiser. We love the arts here, and she's the director. If you like art and you're in my house, you're in the right place.
That's great. Well, if you want to promote that on the Rising Tide Publications page, feel free.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, glad to. I take care of my people. So let's start out with your life. Now, how did you get started doing artwork, and who were some of your influences?
So I'm one of these guys who kind of feels like I was always a comic book fan. I talked to some people who say they got into comic books a little bit later, or they always have some. I hear a lot of people who discovered them when they were like 13 years old, mm-hmm. which always throws me off because they were always around when I was a child. Mm-hmm. Now I'm old enough to remember the spinner rack, so I bought a lot of comic. In fact, I have the spinner rack, the very spinner rack that the drugstore down the street from me used to have.
I'm verdant with envy.
So it's really cool. It's not just a spinner rack. It is the one that I bought all my comics from. I bought Shogun Warriors #3 off of it, which I think was my first comic I bought off of it. Nice. What is that, about 77?
That sounds right. It was definitely like 72. Yeah, I love that title.
But I came from 2 parents who liked art. My father has sold antique lighting for about 50 years, and my mother studied ballet in college, and so neither one of those people were specifically artists, but they liked art. They were always around it. And I liked to draw growing up. And then, you get a hold of some comic books when you're fairly young and, you have art supplies. You need to try your hand at it. I never had more fun drawing Batman than when I was 7, but I certainly got a lot better at it now.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you this. I was fortunate enough that there was a comic shop not far from where I grew up. And these days, comic shops are fairly common, but I used to shop from the Comic Carnival, which I think was Indianapolis' first comic book store.
Carrollton, yeah. I think it was. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I shopped there often enough that I got my nerve up and typed up a little resume when I was 13, and they gave me a job. And so I worked there throughout junior high and high school and college. Now, I didn't study art formally. I'm self-taught. But as I said, I came from a family that liked art, and I had the fortune of working in that comic shop and seeing a lot of things. That was a comic shop that, back then, they specialized. They still carry a lot of back issues, but they really specialized in it.
Yeah.
And so I can remember, spending a lot of time handling books that were much older. So I was exposed to, not just Wally Wood, but 1950s Wally Wood when he really was, hitting on all cylinders. And I might have been, 15 years old, so there's a great art education that way.
Oh yeah.
But I always liked it. I drew for my high school newspaper. I drew for my college newspaper. And I will tell you one of the things that it kind of makes sense that I turned into a comic book artist because I had that love for comics, but as well, when you draw for publication, you tend to learn different skills than you would if you were doing gallery work.
Right.
The biggest thing is there are restraints. I couldn't ever use gold paint. You can't print gold. You can make a nice original, but you can't photograph it and print with it.
It's true.
Certainly not in a traditional comic book. And then there are also, I learned how to use Zipatone when I was, in about, ninth grade or something like that. I can't believe that I did this. So this really tells you it was a different era. So I worked for my high school newspaper, which was still live type. That was the term they used. So back then, when you printed a newspaper, you had a big sheet that was your newspaper, and you'd use printed out type, and you'd arrange it all using wax to hold it into place.
Yep.
And you'd have to sometimes very carefully cut out little pieces and glue them in before you photograph that whole sheet. Yep. So can you imagine this now? I used to walk around high school with a knife set. No, I'm kidding. Like a set of different X-Acto knives.
Right.
And I remember somebody asked me one time, it was like, what's that little wooden box? And I just swung it open. It's my knife set. And they couldn't believe I carried it. And lots of people knew I had it.
Yeah.
I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, the metal detectors would never let you in.
No, and if you've ever handled an X-Acto knife, they are no kidding. They are real knives.
I sliced off the tip of my finger one night when I worked in Office Depot with one of those knives. So I understand. Those things are
I've never done it.
Sharp.
But yeah, they were. But it's funny. I learned a lot about production then. I mean, it really, really did. I learned a lot about printing. And then when I went to college and I studied journalism, it was the same thing, but just on a larger scale. Digital was just coming in, and I'm fortunate enough that I started my career when I did and how I did, because I learned a lot of the classic techniques, and I was young enough that digital wasn't too hard for me to learn. It was a little tricky at first.
Right.
I wasn't doing much with digital before I was about 20, 24, something like that. These kids who come up with it now, like they're whizzes. Like I do it professionally, and I can meet 12-year-olds that can do things I've never heard of.
I know. Oh,
yeah.
I hear you. Yeah. I'm just right. I'm an old journalism student too, and it's like, of course I are. Yeah.
We always recognize each other every time.
Big surprise, right? But no, I was thinking back to my days when we had computers. They were on punch cards, so that's how far back I go. So anyway, onward. This is great.
We call that a loom.
Yes, exactly.
By the way, I'm enjoying my San Pellegrino. It's a real internet chat when I've had to break out the bottle of water.
Oh, there you go. Well, and I've got my Animal Eye cup. Cindy Kep, if you're in the audience, this is for you, darling. So anyway, you
asked me about some of my influences, though.
Yeah, your influences, because you're working in the comic shop, and even in the time you're at, I'm just thinking you're still having some of the classic artists still producing work at that time.
It's an interesting thing in that I got into it when I was so young that a lot of the guys. Comic books are relatively young. You don't have any superhero comic books prior to 1938. That's Action
Right.
Comics #1.
That's true.
Now you've got some newspaper artists of great importance that sort of give us the building blocks. Hal Foster on Prince Valiant and Alex Raymond on Flash Gordon, that sort of thing.
Yeah, beautiful.
But I'm in there just at the moment where most of the guys are still around. I had been working in the comic shop for several years before the 1989 Batman movie came out. So Bob Kane was around, Gil Kane was around. Carmen Infantino, I remember Bob Layton did a signing at our shop when I was probably, 13, 14, 15.
Yeah, he's from Indy, yeah. Him and Roger Stern, yeah.
He and Stern were, and so they're really important because going back to the 70s, they put out a zine called CPL, which stood for Contemporary Pictorial Literature. Yep. So Indianapolis kind of always had this built-in comic book scene, and then knowing that it had its first comic shop, and that's where I ended up working. It was this kind of nice thing. But here's what's weird about it. I thought about this, and I remember going to, I think it was seventh grade, changed schools. So a lot of the world has middle school. We had junior high, okay, which is only seventh and eighth.
Yeah.
The rest of the world has middle school, which is sixth, seventh, and eighth. So in seventh grade, I switched schools and I met new kids, and I remember meeting my friend Mark, who liked comic books, and he introduced me to the other kids who liked comic books. And I was introduced as hey, or here's Stuart, he likes comics, but hang on, you guys, he's a DC fan. And
Oh,
that was a little bit odd, and it's pre-Dark Knight too. So I was a
yeah.
Batman guy, and people said like, what do you like about Batman? And I told them I was a really, really big Neil Adams fan, and I think you can see it in some of the Batman work I do. There's an echo there.
Yeah.
But so all the Neil Adams wasn't producing many comic books by at this time. This is like 1987, 88. He was doing a few things of continuity, but his real, big Marvel DC work is finished.
Yeah.
So there was this odd thing that, when kids asked me who were the artists I liked, it was like I liked Adams and Wrightson and Kaluta, and they weren't doing a whole lot, whereas all my friends liked Perez, Miller, Byrne. These are great guys,
Right.
but it's kind of funny because I think about getting into that comic shop when I was 13, and that sounds young, but if I'd been buying comics certainly regularly since I was 7, your tastes are already, they're not, it's not as though they're done expanding, but your first loves are already established.
Right.
I've talked about this a couple times. I was absolutely heartbroken in 1979 when I saw how beautiful the Michael Gold Micronauts were. And I was heartbroken because I felt like a traitor because I was such a DC fan. And Micronauts was published by Marvel. But these are the little steps you take, open your mind. You're like, oh, it's, if it's good, you got to accept it in the door.
Right, right. Well, and he later went on to do work for DC. He drew several issues of Batman in Detective Comics and such. So
He did lots. He was,
yeah.
I just spoke with him last week, and I didn't know this. He was an editor and I think an art director for DC for, what was the name of it? DC briefly published the Archie Heroes.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah. Back in the 90s. Yeah.
He was the editor art director for that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Never knew that. That's
I didn't
interesting.
either, but he was telling me about picking color palettes and such for the covers, knowing that it was for a younger audience.
Oh, that's
Michael's smart artist. He knows a lot.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because I would, I'm speaking as a semi non-artist. It's like I would think that you'd need a simpler, more vivid palette for younger readers to catch their and keep their attention, rather than say a lot of the murkier covers or colors rather that we see a lot now with computer coloring.
So this is what I wrestle with. This is a good question. Okay. So it seems like that's true. Is it? And is there a way to test and prove it? I don't know. Because I can tell you, one of the things that really made me respond to the Adams Batmans when I was little is that they were darker, they were murkier.
Yeah.
And this sounds kind of small, but to me, but it's not. But in 1975, both Marvel and DC switched from metal to plastic printing plates.
Yes.
And a plastic printing plate, when you apply pressure to it, it squishes and spreads. So you don't get as many clean lines, and your printing can turn a little bit almost muddy.
Yeah.
So what they did was they made everything bolder and louder to kind of compensate for the fact that you didn't have quite as much control. And I didn't respond to that. I actually that's one of the reasons why I think I like the Atom stuff. I like the older comics better when I was younger, and I never knew why, and I realized they were genuinely printed better.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember an issue of Captain America right after they switched to the plastic plates and the slightly cheaper paper that Apatiba they were using. And there was an issue, it was a Paul Neary artwork job where Cap gets hit in the face with by one of his villains, one of his minor villains. And in the next panel, the image of his nose had dropped out.
Oh.
So like the thing had flattened his nose to be even with the rest of his face. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, he killed Steve Rogers. But anyway, you're getting all this wonderful influence. Now, what made you want to go pro, and how did you go about
it? That's an interesting thing. So, like I said, I didn't formally study art. but I worked for my school newspaper, both at high school and college, for a long time. And I can remember, so a few things. I don't know if it necessarily made me decide to go pro, but these are the things that sort of pushed me in that direction. Is that they could tell that I was specifically interested in drawing art for reproduction. Listen, this is a time just prior to digital photography.
Right.
So if you had, if the school, by the way, I went to Indiana University and they had a really strong journalism department. They put out a large quality newspaper daily.
Oh yeah.
If you had photographs that didn't come out and the event was over, you don't have any pictures. So the next best thing you do is you call up an illustrator and you say, we need something to sort of fill in the hole. So they knew that I liked to draw illustration, liked to draw in a style that photographed well. And I basically walked into the journalism department and I said, they asked, what do you want to work on? They asked me what I wanted to write. And I just saw how many writers they had and no one was drawing. And I said, I'd like to do some art. Well, I was fortunate enough they had somebody who needed something right there and then. And I made a piece for them that in like 20 minutes and they liked it. And so then I kind of almost immediately became the go-to illustrator for them. But finally, I started, doing enough of it that they started saying, like, maybe we can count on him for some things other than just being a problem solver.
Right.
I wanted an illustration one time for sort of a Sunday type magazine, like, the newspapers had. And they said, this is your chance to have a full color cover. And in a pre-digital world, I thought, wow, how am I even going to make this thing? I need it to photograph well. That's the other thing. So I need really rich colors. So I thought, I'll make it in chalk pastel, which is what I did. And it's flat, so you don't get a glare when you photograph it, which is why I did that. And the problem was, I thought it looked printed fairly well, but it was a little bit undersaturated.
Right.
And I remember the people in charge of production, they felt very bad, and they said, nobody ever does anything like this. If you really want to make an illustration again and have the colors be really good, you probably ought to use Photoshop, which I'd never heard of and didn't know what it was. But the opportunity presented itself. And I knew that some people, I started looking into it, and I heard that comic books started using this. And I thought, why don't I go ahead and learn it? I'm in college, let's learn something. So it was the newspaper that pushed me towards doing Photoshop. Then finally, I did an illustration for them, which placed as the second best collegiate illustration in the country.
Nice.
Kind of a wow. I was like, wow, maybe this is pretty good. And I remember I entered this contest. I did a newspaper strip for the paper at one point, and I didn't win. And all I remember reading was who had won the whole thing, and it was some guy, I don't know who he is, and his name was Frank Cho.
Oh, him?
Yeah, that guy.
Oh, that guy. He keeps getting in trouble.
I know. Well, I saw the work he did, and he was very deserving. I mean, he really could draw. But you do these little steps, and you start learning more skills. And then the university said, "Hey, this is a nice illustration." They entered it in something you won. I already had this background in comics, and so when I graduated, it was time to get a job. And that didn't sound like much fun. So I kind of thought about it, and I thought, I had a background in journalism. I knew the production. I could do the art. I had some story ideas. Before I just sort of say, sign me up for the 9 to 5, I had one last chance to roll some dice, And I did the unthinkable because I don't know what came over me, but I just decided that if I was going to do it, I should really do it. And I had made sample pages, and I'd gone to Wizard World Chicago, which was the big Midwest show at the time. It had gotten reviews from different editors, and a lot of people liked my stuff. Bob Schreck gave me my first review, and he liked my stuff, and he ended up hiring me later.
Nice.
But it was an odd feeling to get pretty good reviews and never get hired. And I kind of thought to myself, why am I making sample pages? Why don't you just make a comic book? Do your own thing. And if they want to hire you, they can. So I did the sort of, the story of like if you're going to have some big attack or siege, I don't know who did this, you cross the river, and then once you get to the other side, you burn your ships. Right, yeah. That was sort of what I did. So I came back from the show, and I called Wizard up, and I said, I want to buy a table for your convention. And I think it was Brenda Cook was running it. And she said, kid, you're too late. It was last week. And I said, no, I want to buy one for next year. And so I bought a table with no comic to sell. Right. And I got off the phone, and I said, you have 362 days to make a comic book. So I did.
That's great.
But I also thought, this is the part that was kind of crazy. I thought, it's going to take a lot to do it. And I kind of felt like the expense to make a comic book is so great. And I didn't just mean dollars, I mean time, energy, focus, sacrifice the other things. I'm not going to, whatever, go out and play Frisbee with my friends. I got to draw this thing.
Right.
And so I just kind of felt like if you're going to do it, why not really do it? And I didn't have a lot of money for it. So I did the unthinkable, and I went through the comic collection. And if it was valuable, I sold it.
We've all done that, yeah.
And that was the startup capital. And so I saw a couple dealers, and in two big waves, for the most part, I got my money, and I bought a computer, which I didn't have. Got my first printing bill. I bought an ad through Previews, which was not cheap, but I just kind of felt like, if we're going to do it, let's do it.
Right.
I think a lot of people thought I was crazy, and I'm not sure they were wrong. But on the other hand, it was kind of hard to say. It was kind of hard to say that I wasn't sincere.
Yeah.
If you're willing to put forth that time and energy and expense, how can anybody not at least be a little supportive? And then the fortunate thing happened to me was I set up at Wizard World, and I will tell you, if you've never made a comic book, one of the best feelings ever is being at your table 5 minutes before they open and looking around and say, okay, I'm ready to go, and the world's going to judge me. And I felt like I had a pretty healthy attitude. Everybody wants to be Todd McFarlane right out of the gate.
Right.
But I kept telling myself, it's like, if anybody buys my comic book, that means they want this more than anything else in the room. And that means if you sell it at all, you got to feel pretty good about it. Yeah. And it ended up that, I think I have a copy. Here was the comic I made.
Cool.
It was this one right here.
Yeah.
Which is Shiver in the Dark. This is the first one. And it sold pretty well. And here was the funny thing about it. I was so fortunate because my table happened to be right across from Diamond Comic Distributors.
Oh, nice.
And they watched me sell it. And finally they came over after most of Saturday, and they said, you've been selling this pretty well. And I said, yeah. And they said, we don't remember you even submitting this to us. And I said, I hadn't. I just made it. And they said, well, you should submit it. It's selling really well. We'll carry it. And I'd heard that some independent people had a hard time submitting, but I had no trouble at all.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So then the scary thing was I really kind of felt like, okay, I've done it. I've achieved the dream. I'm done. And I came home and I checked my email, and people wanted to know, when does issue 2 come out? And that was horrifying. You barely climbed the mountain. Now you have to climb it again.
Right.
But each time is easier than the one before. That's true.
Yeah. Now, was this print on demand, or did you go to a private printer and get like 4,000 or 5,000 copies?
No, so that's just it. I said I wanted to do it for real. So by the way, there wasn't a ton of print on demand here, so it's offset.
Yeah.
I called up a couple printers, and I finally found one that I liked. And I was really fortunate because at the comic book store I worked at, we had a regular customer who had done a lot of advertising work for pharmaceutical companies. And he had known me since I was like 13. At this point, I'm in my late 20s. And he very graciously said, I'd always wanted to make a comic book. I knew I'd never be able to. If I can answer any questions or help you in any way, I'd love to live vicariously. And I thought, sure. Well, he really did know a lot of things I didn't know. He helped me get the book ready for pre-press production. I could draw the thing, but that doesn't mean that I knew what a good scan looked like.
Right.
I knew how to format the files. Back then, you used to have to make printer spreads.
Right.
I mean, if anybody even knows what that is, now you can just turn in finished pages, and the computer of the printer will typically arrange everything for you. But back then, we had to line it all up and have all the trim marks, and it was kind of terrifying. What he gave me more than anything else was kind of the confidence that I could do it.
Yeah.
And he looked over what I'd done and said, these are all fine, but this is very wrong.
That's cool. Now you did everything yourself: art, writing, lettering, and everything.
Yeah, I did.
Very cool.
Terribly satisfying. I remember I just before I started to get some work from DC, I was having a conversation with Eric Larson about maybe taking the series over to Image.
Oh, yeah.
And because I had done it all my own, parts of it are better than others. Right. And I remember being aware that it's probably not lettered as well as it could be. I hadn't done a lot of digital lettering. Digital lettering is really, it's easy to do to a degree that is okay.
Right.
It's very hard to do well.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who think they do it well because they don't know what well is. And when you're young, you're one of those guys. And I remember he was asking me. He said, would you consider getting a letterer for the book? And I said, well, right now I'm doing it all by myself and it's mine, and there's something kind of wonderful about that. It is exactly my vision.
Mm-hmm.
I told him, I said, I don't think that having someone else letter it would compromise that too much. But I did tell him this. I said, you know what? But I promise you can get a letterer that's better than me. And I promise you can get a writer that's better than me, and an artist that's better than me, and an editor that's better than me. And sooner or later, there'll be nothing for me to do. And I said,
Yeah.
so this is the best book that I know how to make. And providing it's not compromised too much, yeah, a letterer is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I don't remember what it was. I think I got hired for something like the Man of Steel movie or something. And it was like, oh, well, okay, I'll get back to that when this is over. And then I just kept getting hired for other things, and I've been meaning to get back to it, which leads me to my big plug.
By all means.
Can I give you guys a plug? So
get out the power strip, buddy. Get ready.
Well, it's the 20th anniversary of the series. I came out with 3 issues, and I've been working on a new full color series. And so I'm going to have a Kickstarter that's going to be the 20th anniversary of the first 3 issues. And this will start here in not too long, a couple weeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reprint the first 3 books with new covers, new inside covers, some bonus pages. And they're only going to be 300 sets of each. They're going to go live. I'll probably sell out. I even teamed up with, this is the prototype here. Oh, so much glare. And the reason you can't get a better look, wow, that is so much glare.
Yeah, try tilting the top down a little.
I will. Well, the problem is it's inside a CBCS.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason it is because I've teamed up with them and we made a custom label for it.
Yeah, now that's pretty cool.
It's really cool. So if you want to get one of these, stay tuned. Follow me on Facebook or any of my other social media. But gosh, I can't get a good picture of it without the glare.
That's right. If you want to see what it looks like, you'll have to get involved in the Kickstarter campaign. So there.
Right, and that is coming here soon. But and then after that, like I said, a full color series. So I'm really excited to get back to it. You know, I've been doing a lot of work for Dynamite, and they have been so much fun to work with. They have been great. But at the same time, there's always this itch of, the project I always wanted to do. They give me a ton of freedom to draw, but I don't write anything for them. And this would be a chance to go back to my own baby.
That's cool. That is very cool. And you're going to keep me in the loop about this so I can help promote, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Quite certainly. Yeah.
Thank you. I feel better now.
Of course I will.
And Sarah says, I love the title of your first comic book. And let's see. And the Historical Fencing Guild, Friday nights at 8 p.m. says, please always plug. That's what we believe in around here.
You know what? The funny thing is about this, the plug always seems cheap, but there's all kinds of people I find out who, I'm sure there are people watching me right now who didn't know who I was or didn't know about this book. I mean, this is how you find out about things.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, I had made this comic book and I told you the story of how, Diamond was very helpful to me. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you, one of the greatest, best Christmas gifts I ever got was an issue of Wizard magazine came out that spotlighted on independent comic books. Oh. And I think it was Christmas Eve it came out. And there was an article in there, and the article was the best independent comic you'd never heard of. And because I self-published it, that was the one. I mean, when I say independent, this isn't like, Dark Horse or IDW. This was really self-published by one person. And they gave me a really nice write-up. And then that was one of those things where a whole bunch of people discovered the book. Mm-hmm. Not that they didn't go to their comic shops, not that they wouldn't have bought it, but they just weren't aware of it.
Right.
Well,
yeah, and then it's like I wasn't aware of it. I saw copies recently somewhere, but I think it's right after meeting you that I became aware of it.
Could have been. And let's face it, there are a lot of good comics out there.
There really are. And let's see. Well, we've got a couple of questions here, and then I'd like to get back to interrogating you. Rick Bradley says, and thank you everyone for showing up tonight. We do appreciate you. What is your favorite cover you have drawn? Well,
I'm supposed to pick my own self-published thing, but that's a little cheap. Let's talk about something else.
Cheap and easy are what we do here, Stuart.
There are a couple that I like that really stand out. I'll tell you this. So I grew up a Batman fan. There's a certain satisfaction of getting to work on something you've long wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
This was a Joker cover I did a while back.
Mm-hmm.
I was very, very fond of.
That's
Um,
lovely.
it's satisfying because it's a character I've drawn since I was really little, and I kind of felt like I know how to do this right. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want any art direction on this. I'm going to turn it in. Um, it was just something that I felt was in me, and I just got a chance to show everybody, hey, I've been a fan of this so long. I know what I'm doing.
Right.
Um, Micronauts #1, I did a variant for that. I'm really fond of that because that was another childhood favorite, and I put my all into that.
Mm-hmm.
Strangely, there's a cover for a comic book called Jeepers Creepers, and #3 I think is a really, really strong cover.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Usually, you're happiest when the answer to this question is whichever one you drew last. You always want to be happy with what you drew most
Sure.
recently. I just finished my last Army of Darkness cover, and it came out really well, so I'm kind of on a high from that.
Oh, sure, yeah. And Cindy Kep says, "What's your next project?" Which will probably be the Kickstarter revival of your first comic, right?
There's that, and as I said, Army of Darkness and Kiss are still coming out, and
Mhm.
Dynamite has not announced the project that I'm doing covers for right now. It's another horror title.
Mhm.
You'll probably find out pretty soon, but I'm good about not giving away the secrets early.
That's good. That's
I said I
keeping.
won't tell, and I'm not going to.
That's right. Keeping secrets is sometimes that's why we have NDAs. That's one thing probably. The fact that you can keep your lips sealed about these things and not reveal it till the powers that be want you to probably helps you get jobs too,
I
aside
don't
from
think
your
it
talent.
hurts.
Yeah.
It's like I've often wondered if it's one of these things where they say, if I say, "Hey, I'm going to the New York Comic Con," can I tell everybody I'm working on, the Joker or whatever? I almost wonder if they say you're not supposed to, but we really hope you do. It's like
Yeah.
they're particularly if if it's a license something or other. If
Right.
it's in the case of like Army of Darkness, the movie people may have a particular concern there, but
Mhm.
I don't know. I try to tell everybody as quickly as I can. The nice thing is, I think the internet has done a lot to connect everybody so quickly, so directly. Once people are aware of my work, it's pretty easy to follow me once you know who I am.
Mhm. Yeah. Now,
You know,
quick question. You mentioned your first job outside of your comic was DC Comics. Did they approach you, or did you work up samples for them, or how did that start?
So this is a funny thing, and I'm glad you asked this because I'm going to give an answer that's a little bit broader than what you asked, and that is
Good.
basically this. Um, Pete, that's a good question as it relates to me, but let's talk about how it relates to everybody, which is how do
Please.
you break into this industry?
Right.
And I don't think that there's any definitive way to do it. When I was first trying to do this in the '90s, I guess everybody said you had to make sample pages, and I think that was kind of the truth.
True.
But
Back then.
yeah, and it still is today. But I always kind of feel like it's much, much, much easier to get in if you just self-publish something. You can have Xeroxes, or you can have a book that you've made.
Mhm.
And I always kind of felt that one of the things that helped me get hired at DC was they could see that I had made a book and it was finished and it was professional, and they saw that the fans were responding to it.
Yeah.
They can if I give sample pages and I give it to an editor, maybe my style might be a little bit different. Maybe I don't connect with him,
Yeah.
but if editors can see that fans like you, that goes a long way.
Mhm.
And so it's harder to get in. It takes more resources and more money. But let's face it, it's hard to get in anyway.
Yeah.
If you think you want into this, self-publish a comic book, particularly now because digital printing allows you to make a really high quality product where you don't have to get 3,000 like I did. But how I got my first job at DC is kind of magical. I was at San Diego. Um, uh, I really had to lobby to get a table there. I made myself a real pain in the neck for um, oh, I'm blowing it. Clydeen Nee, who ran the San Diego Comic Con.
Right.
So way back when, it used to be if you went to the San Diego Comic Con website, there was a little declaration there that said artists get free tables.
Mhm.
And I had published a comic book, and I wrote them, and I said I want a free table. And they said, well, we're all booked up for this year. And I said, that's fine. I want next year. And they said, well, we're not accepting applications yet. And I said, well, you tell me what I have to do.
Mhm.
And I just kind of kept beating on the door saying, I want an opportunity for this. And I kind of felt it was a little unfair if they advertised it and don't come through with it.
Right.
And so I finally, mailed off a book to them, and they just said, this guy made a comic book. He's doing all the right things. Let's give him one. And so they kind of championed me. So I set up there, and I had a portfolio of original drawings. You show off some of your stuff. And a fan was really enjoying a particular Green Lantern drawing I'd done. And I really thought he was going to buy it. And then he didn't. I said, well, it is for sale if you want to buy it. And he was deep in thought, and he said, no, I don't want to buy it. And he said, but I'm an art director at DC, and I'm doing some Green Lantern trading cards, and I think this would look great for us.
Oh, nice.
And that was Kevin Canary. So he gave me my first job, and it was kind of the perfect job to get started on because nobody wants you to miss the deadline on an entire book. But if you miss the deadline on one card, it's not going to screw up the whole project. Mm-hmm. So I think he gave me 4 cards, and I turned them in. And this is kind of funny. I've told the story several times, but almost immediately I uploaded them to DC waiting to get notes, corrections, rejections, who knows what. And I uploaded them about 15 minutes later, not from my editor, but from someone else. I got a reply. And in my head, I was sure it was someone in production who said, oh, your blacks are not true blacks or something had gone wrong. But in fact, it was another editor who had seen the cards I just turned in and liked them and gave me a job to work on some Batman cards.
Oh, nice.
So, momentum is everything. Get the work done, do it on time, be easy to work with. That always helps.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about that was, even after that happened, a couple trading cards is not, it feels great, and you could use the money for sure, and you have this nice credit. But, people always think, does that mean you're in? And no, it doesn't. You're never really in. You have to get the next one. And I continued to make Shiver in the Dark comics until I got the Lego job, which was just so big there just wasn't time to do anymore. Right. But truly, I think the thing is you need to get lucky, but you kind of have to put yourself in position for the luck to happen. I knew that the editors were at San Diego looking for artists, and I had to figure out how to get there. Mm-hmm. And if that convention is where it has to be, then I got to figure out a way to get in the door.
Right.
That was a lot.
Yeah. Well, you make a great point here that you had a battle plan. You had a goal, and you figured out the way to get to, your goal, basically, or to be in a position where if the right confluence of events happened, you'd get what you were after. And that's something I think a lot of creators don't do. They just kind of let things happen to them. Whereas somebody like you, I like to think myself, we set our sights on something and then we work towards it.
Well, I'll tell you, here's what's hard about it.
Yeah.
I feel I've met many. I mean this is not hyperbole.
Sure.
I've met many creators who are much more skilled than I am,
yeah.
at either drawing or writing or inking, coloring. But you got to work very hard to do this, and then there's a little bit of get up and go. You really have to have. Getting your first job and getting your foot in the door and making those connections. It is a lot like asking a stranger out on the first date regularly. Mm-hmm. And if you can't muster up the energy to do that, there's someone else who will. Right. And that's really crushing for a lot of people who want to do this. Mm-hmm. I never knew that it was going to work. It was almost like I kind of felt like I knew what it was going to cost to make my first comic book. I knew the amount of labor. I could put all that into it. I knew what it was going to cost to print. If I said, I'm going to put $5,000 into this project, I'm not going to lose more than that. Can I be satisfied with that loss? And I'll probably sell some, and, the closer I get to breaking even, the better. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about it was, in my case, like I didn't make money the first 2 years I did this. Even though people told me the books sold fairly well. Mm-hmm. It's hard to go to shows. It's hard to find the shows to go to. It's hard to summon the energy. It's hard to have the flexibility with another job if you have one. Mm-hmm. And I can remember here was a great lesson to me when I came back to Wizard World Chicago the next year with issue 2. Mm-hmm. Here's what was exciting and interesting. I didn't know what to make of it, but there were a whole bunch of people who kind of were taken back. Oh, so what are you doing here? And I said, oh, I was here last year, and I made a comic book. Here's issue 2. And you get this strange look on everybody's face. which is, it took me a while to figure out. It's, oh, you were supposed to go home brokenhearted because your book didn't go sell well enough and quit.
Mm-hmm.
And it sold pretty well. I mean, to be honest, the table was expensive in the hotel and travel
Sure.
and printing. I wasn't in the black,
Yeah.
but I loved the experience. And I did have fans, and I felt like if I keep going, it can go some places. So I made issue 2. And I know there were some people who came by who were seasoned. You know, they can't afford to buy everything, who saw me the first year and didn't buy the comic book. And they said, now you have 2 of them, and you came back. Okay, this is bigger than I thought it was going to be. I'll buy them both.
Right.
You know, and then there was a third year that was like that. And I kind of feel like that's sort of what allowed me to have the opportunity at DC, because that didn't come around until my 4th year.
Right.
And I remember there was about a 3 or 4 year window where I felt like 3 or 4 month window where I felt things had kind of plateaued. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know if I was just going to be stuck where I was. And then in 2 days, back to back, I got the job to do the trading cards. And the next day I got asked to do 2-page illustration for Wizard Magazine.
Nice.
And it was just kind of, it's funny. It seemed like it came at just the right time. I mean, it felt appropriate. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like I had, done something miraculous or lucky. It seemed like that was the next natural progression.
Yeah. Well, they say, that success is often, opportunity meeting preparation. You've done your homework, you did the work, you set it up, and things just worked in your favor. And the fact you kept plowing it. I keep telling people, since it's
possible they wouldn't have, and that's something else to consider.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Here, I'll tell you this. Here's what's interesting about it. So that the second job I got on those Batman trading cards.
Yeah.
That right after I got that job from that art director, he ended up leaving DC and going to Warner Brothers. So on one hand, I felt like, I got this great second connection, and then I lost him. So a couple things could have happened. He might not have ever seen the Green Lantern cards, and I might have never gotten my second job. The art was just as good as it was or wasn't going to be. I was fortunate enough he did that. Then I was really unfortunate because he left.
Right.
But then I was really fortunate because he ended up being at Warner's and remembered me 10 years later and hired me to work on the Superman movie.
Uh-huh.
So some of it is a little bit of outlook, because there were a lot of other times where I could have gotten other jobs and got passed over. I was that close to getting to work on Suicide Squad. I'm not supposed to tell you that.
I didn't hear it.
No, you didn't. But one of the people who was acquiring art for that, he was very forthright. He said, "We're hiring artists, and you're my second choice. And I have a guy ahead of you I need to talk to."
Yeah.
And I know who it was. Doggone it, and he took the job. But
darn him.
So here's the thing: you can be that close and also get nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what's tricky.
That's true. Now, what did you do in relation to the Superman movie? What was your contribution art-wise?
So I did about 20, I don't remember how many it was, 20, 25, something like that. It was around 20 pieces that were made relatively late in production for it. So a lot of times people, when I tell them I worked on that, they always think that I did storyboards, and I didn't.
Right.
I did fully rendered illustrations, meaning they were print ready.
Right.
So a lot of what I did served one or two purposes. At the very least, almost all the pieces I made were used to help promote the movie via products. So there were a lot of school folders, backpacks, T-shirts, coffee mugs, ballpoint pens with my Superman on it,
right,
or my General Zod. But they also had me illustrate some key scenes of the movie, and then my art was handed over to CGI people to sort of match the look and feel.
Oh, nice.
I have to be perfectly honest, I don't know a whole lot about the production of that movie and a whole lot about my involvement, and that's basically because so many people work on something like that. The non-disclosure agreements are many.
Sure.
And they don't want anything leaking. And so I remember I was giving, I think, one photo of the Superman costume, and my name was watermarked all over it in case it leaked.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they just didn't want it out there.
Yeah.
And they were very matter of fact. They weren't threatening or anything, but they said, please don't let this out. And it dawned on me that, if it does, it could, you can't get that back.
Right.
You wrecked a project. But it started out, I was only going to do about 4 pieces. But from what I understand, Snyder really liked what I turned in, and they gave me 4 more, which turned into 4 more, which turned into 8 more, and it just kept going.
Yeah. Now, did you get a credit in the movie?
I don't think so.
Okay, I was wondering because I sat through all the credits, and I usually look for any, just in case I know someone.
So here's what's amazing. My wife and I got to see a private screening of it. There was not too far from where I lived. There was a movie theater. Honestly, their name was Metropolis Movies, and so the owner was a big Superman fan, and he heard that I wasn't too far away, and asked if I would just come and talk Superman. And of course I would.
Sure.
And what we didn't know was they had set up. They had something like 8 screens, and they had allocated one for just the 2 of us. So my wife and I got to see it by ourselves, and it was kind of amazing. I will tell you, I don't normally talk during a movie, but that time I felt very free to do so.
Yeah.
We were loud with the candy wrappers, and it was ours. It was just like being on the couch. It was pretty great.
Oh, that's funny. Now, Cindy Cap says, what do you get when you cross an apple with a superhero? Cider Man.
Yes.
And what did Iron Man say to Spider-Man? Stop bugging me. And what common advice given to noobs is not worth the electrons it's typed with?
Let's see. What
common advice given to noobs is not worth the electrons it's typed with? What
common advice is not worth it?
Yeah. Other than appearing on this show,
Let's see. Gosh, what common advice? I love this question. I don't want to go past it. I want to come up with something because
this is my girl Cindy.
I know there's so many people who want to do this, and they're looking for some sort of advice that's really helpful. And I would say,
yeah, what's the least helpful though?
I will tell you this.
Yeah.
For your first, when you're trying to get into this, don't set your. This sounds kind of cheap, but bear with me on this. Don't set your sights too low. Mm-hmm. A lot of people want to just kind of get in, and so they don't present themselves in the best way. I really think that the best thing I did was I just said, I'm going to throw a little bit of money at it so that my printing was decent and my presentation was decent. I can tell you, when I told everybody I was drawing a comic book, they all thought I was crazy. And I know there was some snickering behind my back. I'm being honest.
Oh, no. We all get that. I got it too when I started self-publishing. So, yeah, I get it.
And then a couple of years later, when I was working for Lego, the same people, there was a lot of sour grapes. And so I think that the best advice I can really give you is say, if you want to do it, you have to really do it. There's like I don't remember the whole saying, but it's like your single friends don't want you to get a girlfriend, and your lazy friends don't want you to get a job or whatever. It's like that. There's some truth in that. But I would say, here, how about this? Don't ever think that there's a way you break into it. It doesn't work that way. And don't think that there's an editor at Marvel or DC who sort of taps you with a magic wand and sort of hires you for a job. I would really encourage anybody who wants to do this to look at it as though it's their own venture. And if you want to make comic books, then you make a comic book. Don't wait to get hired. I made my first comic book with Xerox, and it was 200 copies. I mean this. Just before I made Shiver in the Dark, I skipped this. But I took it to the local comic shop and asked them to carry it, and took it to a couple record shops, and they carried it, and I sold almost all the copies. Mm-hmm. And that, I didn't know if I could sell 2,000, but I found out I was able to sell 200, and that made it a lot easier to do something bigger. And even that, at that time, that seemed so much bigger than anything I'd ever done. Mm-hmm. But you kind of have to bite off a little bit more and challenge yourself. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that really helps everybody a whole lot, but
I think it's super advice, because especially when you go into a field that you have, if anything, anecdotal evidence of, as a barometer of, success. And I know everyone's success meter is calibrated differently, but making sure you don't set your sights too low. You've always got to stretch. You've always got to reach outside of where your reach should always exceed your grasp.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, that you have to go a little bit beyond. You have to stretch out to get the gold ring as you're passing it by.
this is kind of dumb, but I read this story. If you guys are sports fans at all, the day that Kobe Bryant meets Michael Jordan.
Oh yeah.
I'd heard someplace that Kobe meets him, and his first thing he says is, I can beat you," which might have been really an incredibly crazy, overconfident thing to say. But at the same time, his goal should be to try to beat him.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way for any of us who are comic book artists. If I can look around and I say Frank Frazetta is the best guy, that's what I should try to reach for if I want to be a painter. I think a lot of guys are actually really kind of afraid of that. I always told people, if you ever make a comic book, here's the best thing you can do. Set up, and it's not going to be the best book in the room. Most likely. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons have got Watchmen somewhere in the room, right? You're going to have a hard thing competing. But if you say to yourself and everybody else, listen, this is honestly the best that I could do. I put everything I have into this. If you don't think it's any good, that's fine. But I tried my hardest. And if anybody gives you a hard time beyond that, they're just being a jerk.
Yeah.
And your first one you get done, your second one will always be better. It was for me. It was for everybody else. Just do it if you want. And if you can't afford a $5,000 book, of course, but make what is the biggest that you think you can take on.
That is super advice. And we've got a few questions, but being mindful of your time, do you want to stay for one or two more?
Sure. Go on.
Okay, let me. Cindy Cap wants to know, what's your favorite marketing tactic? I mean, even although you're getting movie offers, you get to draw Gene Simmons every month. You get to draw Bruce Campbell every month. You still have to put yourself out there. What is the most effective marketing tool that you use for your business?
For me,
Yeah.
I think for me, I don't know if this works for everybody else. I think for me, I have an advantage in that I really like this stuff. That's a simple answer, but hear me out. I really kind of feel like if you try to get into this industry and you don't like it, you're probably not going to be able to keep up. That editor, Kevin Canary, who hired me, I remember I was out to New York. I went to the DC offices, and I was never there very often, but I happened to go there this time, and I saw a couple editors I knew, and we were all going to have dinner that night. I think I was in town a day early for the convention or something.
Yeah.
Kevin had worked all day. We were all out at dinner. He's the last one to get there because he stayed in the office, and he sat down, and the first thing he wanted to do was talk about the Green Arrow TV show. And I thought to myself, you've been working on DC Comics all day, and now that you're off the clock, you want to talk about Green Arrow. Like, that's how much he was into it. So that's a hard hurdle to get over, I felt. Because I actually felt like, I love this stuff, and I don't even know if I love it as much as you do, because I need it. All I can think about is, do I want French fries or baked potato? I'm hungry.
Right.
But I like comics. I like talking about them. I usually feel like most of the people, when they buy a comic book, particularly if they like the creator, that goes a long way. I feel like a lot of the people who support me in my comics, they know me fairly well. I'm pretty personable at a convention.
You are.
I'm happy to talk about comic books.
Yeah.
So my advice is, please don't overlook that you aren't half the product. If there are so many people these days. When I grew up, everybody said, "Well, what do you read?" Well, I read Batman or Superman. But these days, they'll say things like, "I'll read anything Bill Sienkiewicz draws, and I'll read anything that Brian K. Vaughan writes, or whomever it is."
Right.
And so you are really part of the product. And so everybody says, "Oh, well, that means social media and so on and so forth." Don't do what you're not comfortable with, and don't be insincere. But if you go to a convention, keep in mind that everybody is there to talk about comic books and have a good time. Engage with them.
Yeah.
Just kind of make yourself accessible. And I also say this too. So, I really wasn't good with color for a long time in my career. And I remember thinking I wanted to get better and I wanted to get ahead in my career. And I thought I could work on my coloring and get better at it. Or, I could abandon that and focus on pencil and inks and really excel at one thing. And I could get ahead doing either one of those things, but which one would necessarily get me further along? Okay. I think the answer might have been if I had just focused on pencil and inking, but I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't it just didn't seem, I wanted a broader understanding of how to make this stuff. And so I just said, you're going to have to get better at your coloring. And I just made myself do it. And so for several years, if people asked me for a commission at a convention and they asked for coloring, I was matter of fact with them. I said, I would love to make one for you, and it's more work for me, and thus you'll pay a little bit more for it.
Sure.
But here's the thing, it is not my forte. I knew that I was digging myself in, that I might have to do something twice because the first one failed.
Mhm.
But, when you tell somebody, you want the challenge, you'll give them the best you can. For the most part, people are rooting for you in this.
Right.
Give them an opportunity to root for you is kind of what I'm going for here.
Oh yeah, yeah. Very few people want to see you fail, except maybe once you start climbing the ladder. Then you may see some people that like to take you down a rung or two. But no, I will tell you, when we met almost 5 years ago, I think it was in Evansville.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the first things that attracted me to your work was your choices of color.
And I tell everybody regularly that's the greatest compliment I feel that I can get.
Yeah.
Because it's hard for me. Truly, it's really hard.
You make it look easy. In fact, I go through Hobby Lobby fairly often, and I believe I've seen your work in there too.
Oh yeah, they did. There's a Batman.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
Warner Brothers. They commissioned me to do a lot of work. Here's the other thing too. Okay, I'll give somebody some great advice if you want to make a comic book, and I really, really, really mean this.
Sure.
So when I was first trying to break into this, I tried to think of what is the kind of comic book I want to make. So there's what the market wants and there's what you want to do.
Right.
And there has to be some overlap, right? So having faith in yourself is one thing, but you can't just sort of say, this is what I want to do. I have enough faith in it. I'm going to make it happen. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
You need to make the comic you want to make, but you also have to kind of be aware of what the market is doing and talk to your friends. What do they want to see in comics they aren't getting? And so in my case, I made a horror comic book. And at the time, 30 Days of Night hadn't come out. Walking Dead was years away from happening. I remember there were a lot of people who came to my table who were kind of excited, and there were several people who said, is this a horror comic book? It looks like it is. And I said, yes. And they said, I don't care what it is. I want to give it a shot.
Yeah.
So they were hungry for it, and it was an unfulfilled market.
Exactly.
And I say that because at the time, X-Men was huge. X-Men is always huge, but sometimes it's huger than it otherwise is. And I knew lots of people who were trying to break into this, making sort of an X-Men-ish team book. Mm-hmm. And I used to say to them, I said, I don't know how you're going to sell that. I know that's what you want to do, but here's the thing. If I love X-Men, I'm going to buy X-Men.
Right.
And if I want more X-Men, I'm going to buy X-Factor. If that's not enough, I'm going to buy X-Force. And if that's not enough, I'll buy New Mutants, and then Excalibur, and then Alpha Flight. And the only way I'm going to buy your book is if I need that many X-Men comics and there are none left.
Right.
Right. Or yours has to be that good that it's better. And at the time, I don't remember, I don't think Jim Lee was still on it, but it was an awfully good book.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said for trying to fill a niche that isn't otherwise hit, that seems like it is also up your alley and what you want to do. And I was fortunate because horror was underserviced.
Right. Well, we've got a couple more questions here.
Yeah, what have we got?
Yeah, we've got one here from Sarah. Sarah, love you, hon. New question: is your career commission based, and if so, what do you get between paychecks? And also, when something is in a store with your art, do you get a cut of the profits? I think what she's asking is, you're paid a fee for the initial art, right?
Yeah.
I don't think she wants dollar amounts. Okay,
No.
She doesn't work with the IRS, I promise. But it's like, you're paid like for the work itself, but do you get a commission on sales from that point on? And granted, you're working with other people's IPs, but what other rights do you have? So I'm adding that part.
So this is the adult question of the interaction tonight, and that is, you can be the best artist, but it doesn't mean you make the best living, or vice versa. The hardest part of this industry is that you have to be a pretty good business person as well. You have to be able to self-promote yourself. Your wage, your rates are ones that you have to negotiate. I always kind of felt like when I talked to a lot of artists, if things are going the way they should, you shouldn't accept every job. There are some that are more rewarding and are better suited for you and pay better than others. And your job is constantly assessing where that mark is. I've been fortunate enough to get pretty regular work in comics for a while, but at the same time, I also had something that I self-published and controlled and can go back to and do more or less with it depending on what sort of holes and backings I have. That's not by accident. That is something that has to be planned. I know, Brian, you go to a lot of conventions. I do too. So I look at the jobs that I have and where I want to put more on my plate and take some off, and that's usually affected by how many conventions I take on.
Yeah.
I always tell young artists that nobody gets to determine the value of your work, both the original piece and the aftermarket, and what you make to from a publisher. Nobody gets to determine that and affect that more than you do.
Right.
It is your job to pay attention to the industry, find out what other people are paying, find out what you can negotiate for. Typically, if I'm hired to draw something in comics or for illustration work, it's a buyout. That is to say, they get the artist there so they can do whatever they want with it. Mm-hmm. Now, some people might say that sounds like a horrible deal. Listen, I love that deal. I think that deal's great. Here's why. We've agreed on what we're going to do, and it's a very small, controlled relationship. I'm going to do something for you. You're going to pay me. If you make $1 million of it after the fact, that's okay, because I was fine with it up front. You kind of have to. You can negotiate lots of different deals, and you have to kind of be prepared to do the negotiation. Anybody ever bought a car off a car lot?
Yeah, right.
Not a lot of fun, but you have to do that with your life. And I don't think that there are people out there who are setting out to rip you off, but there are people who it is their job to figure out how to make a particular book profitable. And maybe this book has a greater budget than this other book. You know how busy you are. You know how much work it's going to be. Also, you know how difficult something's going to be. I've really enjoyed drawing the Army of Darkness covers. But, when I do that, I have to be able to draw Bruce Campbell's face. Right. That is a different type of work, and it's harder than, if I were drawing, something like, a Walking Dead cover where I just have to draw zombies. They're not going to look at a zombie and say, those eyes are too close together. They're not.
Right.
So be aware of what you can take, what you can do, and what you can take on, and what you want to take on. And then you also are aware that different industries pay at different rates. For the work I did for Warner Brothers, I was very happy with the rate. And I was also aware that probably more money was going to be made from the art because it was going to go on T-shirts that made it to Walmart, much larger than a comic book store.
Right.
And so I wrestle with that myself sometimes. How much work do I have to put into it, and what am I getting out of it? But then also, what is the client likely going to do with it?
Right.
You need to be a little sympathetic to what it is that they have, that they can afford to pay to make it worth their while. And maybe the best thing they can offer you is not worth your while. Sometimes you just don't meet. Figuring out where those marks are is really hard. I've often thought it was interesting that I've heard there are a lot of comic book creators in Ohio, and Portland has a lot. Portland used to be inexpensive. It's not anymore.
Right.
I always joke, if you live in the Midwest, your LA dollars will go further. And so some of being a professional and doing this is living a lifestyle and living where you can do the most with your money. But you know what? As it relates to this, and this is a little bit heavier question, I always say don't overlook the opportunity for partnerships you've got that you can make. Your local comic shop is really interested in making sure the creators do well. When creators make good comics and they come in and sign, the comic shop does better. You'll make more money if your comic shop sells your book better. You are not in competition. You are partners, as well as your publisher.
Right.
So I live in the Midwest, and as you know, I live in Indiana.
Yep.
When I hear about someone putting on an Indiana show, I feel as though I want to support all the locals who have supported me.
Sure.
I grew up working in a comic shop, and when I self-published my comic book, nobody sold more of it than they did.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Well, at the same time, if they asked me to do a signing, I always say yes. If they, if they called me up and they said, gosh, we need, a logo. All right, let's work that out because you've been really good to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, build those relationships. Comic book conventions is the same way. I got to do the Walking Dead cover with Wizard. I think I'm a good artist, and I was approved, and all that's the case. But they also knew that I was a good guest, that I was going to show up on time. I wasn't going to leave early. I was going to answer all the questions when fans wanted to talk about it. So the art matters, but the whole package matters. Make yourself as attractive for all these different people as you can, and usually good things happen.
Yep.
It's a tiring biz, I'll tell you that, though. If you don't love it, it's
Oh yeah, that is so true.
what have we got up here?
Comics Talk with Pop Van Zant says, "Hey Stuart, are you going to be at Grand Rapids Comic Con in November?"
I am, and it's
Cool.
a really fun show. I like that show a lot. I've done it the last several years. I missed the last one. COVID had it to where there were a lot of people I got to see every year, and now there are certain people that I haven't seen for well over a year, almost a year and a half.
Yeah.
Some of it is because the show I always saw them at was missed, or maybe they're being a little bit more cautious, or maybe we're booked on opposite weekends. So I'm glad you asked. I am going to do that. I know that I'm going to the Baltimore Comic Con, which is another big one coming up. There's a big weekend coming up here that is either, I think, Motor City, Indianapolis, and Chicago. It's all the same weekend. I'll probably do one of those, and I need to decide.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I think was the C2E2's early December. I think.
That's December. I'll be there.
Okay.
Fingers crossed. Let's hope the virus
No.
world doesn't get in the way.
Well, hopefully I'll be there to see you too. And Sarah asks, "Are you going to DeadCon next month in Fort Wayne, Indiana?"
I don't know what it is, and that's why this stuff is important, because I didn't know about that. I was completely unaware of it. I should look into it.
We'll talk after the show.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. And so let's get a couple comments in. Jonathan O, glad to have you here. That's really insightful. That's why we asked Stuart here, because he's that kind of guy. Ted Davies Artistry, great show, very insightful. Thank you, BKM and Stuart. Thank you very much, Ted Davies Artistry. And since you live in Indiana, everyone is moving to Indiana. We'll get out of Illinois, stat. You know what I'm saying? And Comics Talk with Bob Van Zandt says, awesome. Looking forward to seeing you again.
I do want to close on this because we talked a lot about self-publishing comic books and so on and so forth.
Sure.
I really learned to draw comic books in that I used to draw cartoons with my friends in high school and junior high, college, whatever. Your friends, if you want to sort of bust their chops and get under the skin, you know them, you know their taste, you can draw a cartoon of them, and that was a good training ground. And so the very first comics I made might have had a print run of like 10 copies. You guys all know each other. But that was how small this little thing got started. And I can sometimes get overzealous encouraging people to make comics if they're interested in doing it, because it is a great way to lose a lot of money. But I will tell you this, it's really satisfying. I saw Star Wars when I was 5 years old and I loved it. Okay. And I saw Empire when I was about 8 and I loved it. And they're still making new Star Wars movies. And while I can enjoy them, it's not as good as it is or was when I was 5. It's not. Yeah. And as I've gotten older, I found fewer and fewer things can really grab my attention. But something that has really stayed with me is the joy of being able to draw and write and tell stories. I think that's going to be something that's going to be rewarding to me for the rest of my life. So if this is something you like, you've got a special thing that you can interact with. You don't have to be great. You don't have to make a lot of money. You don't have to be super successful. But something about creating and putting yourself down on paper is really kind of special. There was a time where people used to write a lot of letters to one another, and we don't do that.
Yeah.
The idea of making something and have it be completely yours is pretty wonderful, and I can't encourage that enough.
Yeah.
Really.
That's great. I thank you for that message. That's a powerful message to give, Stuart. And thank you for being here, man. It's been a pleasure. I've had a great time.
Always had fun. I mean it. It was fun. So I'm going to show you a couple little things just before we go.
Okay,
I already told you I'm going to plug this guy when it's live.
You better.
But I promised I would show some art that people didn't get to see before, so I have two pieces. Yes. One of them you had.
Yeah.
Most comic book covers are 11 by 17. And then reduce when they're printed. Well, I'm crazy, so I draw mine really big. So this is the cover of Army of Darkness #1 that I did for Dynamite.
Ooh.
Here's the actual board. And to put it into perspective, I think I have a copy of it here. Let's see if I can put my hands on it. It's colored digitally. Yeah, here's the actual comic book. So here's how much larger I'm drawing this thing.
Yeah, because normally the 11 by 17 translates to about twice up, right? Ish.
I think it's like 60. I'm trying to remember. I think it's like 63%.
Yeah.
But but I like to draw big, and some of it's because I like to use my fingertips for ink. But here's what nobody has seen yet. This is, I think, if I remember right, I think this is the cover to Kiss #4, which was just revealed. And so here's a spaceman here.
Oh, wow.
And look how large that is. Now, this has a lot of lightning on it and glints and lighting effects that I added all digitally. But I like to begin everything on paper, and I'm hoping you can see just how much grayscale work is on this. Because I do my own coloring, I can actually have original art that isn't strict black and white. It's one of the reasons why, if I said I was going to work on my coloring, dedicate to that, and got better at it, that also meant that I had more freedom with my black and white art because I was doing all of it.
Yeah.
So you guys are the first to get to see that. I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, I think, Historical Fencing Guild says thank you for coming on, sharing your experience and knowledge with us. And I think Cindy Kemp speaks for us all. Wow. And Sarah would go broke at your table alone. She also thinks Cindy thinks yeah, that's it. And jaw-dropping artwork and great show. Lots of good infos for writers too. And thank you very much.
Take a look at my website at stuartsayger.com. And if you can't remember that, it is shiverinthedark.com, which is my comic book. And there's a little tab on there that says appearances, and we'll show you the different shows I'm going to and store signings and things like that. And if anybody's watching, come say hi to me. If there's anything I didn't get answered here, ask me in person. I'm happy to talk about this stuff.
By all means. And Greg Harper, thank you for being here. Appreciate the compliment. And also, Stuart is a regular at the Kokomo Comic Con every year.
Again, I all the local guys, all the people who helped me, I try to help them.
Yep. Ditto. Well, anyway, Stuart Sayger again, thank you very much. Please stick around for a moment. I like to say goodnight to you properly, and I'll tell you about DeadCon. How's that real fast?
Love it. Good night.
All right. Thank you, Stuart. And I'm going to mute you and take over the screen while we give some thanks. Thank you to everybody tonight. Sorry we didn't get to mention all of your names tonight, but we'll make up for it later because we'll be here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern for Never Mind the Furthermore. And also we want to thank Jeffrey Hayes and Plasma Fire Graphics for sponsoring this episode. Plasma Fire Graphics, when the look of your book matters to you. Definitely check out the Plasma Fire Graphics Facebook page. See some more incredible cover art that the man does. Also, go to plasmafiregraphics.com and you can contact Jeffrey Hayes there directly and find out what his rates are. They are affordable, believe you me. Plus, the quality is impeccable. Please check him out at plasmafiregraphics.com. Plasma Fire Graphics, when the look of your book matters to you, because it matters to your readers. Also, what matters to me is the Rising Tide Broadcast Network, like-minded broadcasters helping each other rise. And please check out tomorrow. I'll be back at 10 a.m. for Nevermind the Furthermore. And then tomorrow night will be The Truthmongers Return with Ted Davies and Glenn B. Fleming. And, of course, you got to start your day with Michaela's Morning Motivationals, where she kicks you in the ass and gets you out of bed and gets you working towards your goals. Also, don't forget Patreon is a monthly subscription service where you can support your favorite creators directly. And check out these people. They also, in addition to getting their names mentioned on my show, they also have Patreon accounts of their own. Please see what we can offer you in return for your direct support. In my case, it's at www.patreon.com/Brian K. Morris. And don't forget our Thursday night show, Comic Book Spectrum, Thursdays at 7 p.m., 6 p.m. Central, where we review some of the latest releases and talk funny books, because that's what we like to do. Anyway, thank you again to Stuart Sayger for being here. Next week, you'll find out when it happens, and you'll see the last Clever Title Pending. We'll talk to you next week at 8 p.m. or 6 p.m. Central. Oh, and don't forget our YouTube challenge. Please share this. Please share this show. We are trying to get 1,100 subscribers by the end of Halloween night, and if we do that, I'm going to do a special 12-hour. Never mind the furthermore the following Friday. But we are 6/11 of the way there-ish, and so please share this broadcast. Please give us a thumbs up and a share, and subscribe if you would, please. And thank you all for being here tonight, and we will see you next week on Clever Title Pending at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. And as always, folks, stay smart, stay safe, wash your hands, never apologize for being awesome. Have a great one, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week on Clever Title Pending.